Hello everybody. So today I'm going to talk to you about advert design, the landscape that job advertising lives in, and hopefully towards the end some ways that you could possibly look at improving them by blending employer branding. So I'm going to start by just taking a moment to really tell you about where the research is going to come from, because I'm going to use quite a lot of research in this talk. So I thought it'd be good to actually tell you where it comes from and what the context is. So nthuse, actually, its parent company is Magex. I don't know if any of you have heard that name. It might be slightly familiar to you. Magex designs, builds, and hosts job boards for many leading companies in the UK. So the likes of The Guardian, the FT, the Telegraph, they're basically running our platform. We run their job boards on their behalf. We actually run hundreds of different job boards, both here in the UK, in North America, and in Europe. If you look to the side there, these are the figures for across our network for January this year. So 1.5 million job adverts flew through our network during January. So that really equates to about 50 to 60 million adverts a year go through Magex's systems. And in January, 27,000 employers posted that many job adverts. In a usual year, about 55,000 unique employers use one of our systems or another. So obviously we have a large amount of data about job advertising. Our research, because we do research all of the time, basically breaks down into two different types, qualitative and quantitative. Big words, but I'll just explain a little bit about what they are. So on one side, we have the data. So I've just told you there's about 50 to 60 million job adverts that go through. All of those things create loads of data points. We have billions of data points in our databases about what's happened to those job adverts. We put them into a system called Insights. If anybody's used Google Analytics, which tells you about how your website's performed, so maybe your careers website, it tells you about who's visited and what they've done on your site. Insights is like that, but for job boards. It tells me things like how many people have come from an email that's been opened on a mobile phone, gone through to a job advert, and then actually applied. But it also does a lot more than that. It has things in it like the commercial information about supply and demand. So how many jobs are available for technology jobs in the Northeast versus how many people are interested in searching for those types of jobs. So I'm lucky enough to sit in a position where I have an overview over the UK where I can look at hundreds of job boards in aggregate and understand what's going on, or look at one individual job board in our network and understand that in terms of performance to other ones. We also do other types of data testing as well. We do all of the time, we're doing A/B testing, and A/B testing is basically just trying out what one feature looks like on a job board or not. So like if the button's in lowercase or capitalized text, if it's on the left-hand side or the right-hand side, which is going to actually convert better. And we test the job adverts continually, testing all the different types of combinations of design to try and get the best conversion rates and the best application. That's one side of what we do. On the other side of our research and the way that we look at things, we use other types of methodologies, like we do lots of interviews with job seekers, we do surveys all of the time, we have one big one that runs every year, we'll be using some of those stats. We also do group discussions and something called diary studies. So we often mix all of this research together, trying to find the best methodology for understanding a problem space. And sometimes we'll use both data and the types of stuff like interviews and surveys. And one of the first things I need to do, I think, is basically talk to you about why I think job advertising is actually slightly undervalued at the moment. I do really think this. I think that, there's lots of new technology that's out there at the moment, and there's a lot of buzz in our space. But I think it's really worth having a look at how effective job advertising is as it stands at the moment before we look at how we could improve it. So let's start with a typical job seeker journey. This diagram here has lots of dots and all the arrows in between. Candidate journeys are really messy. They involve lots of different contact points, and the actual pass through them can change all of the time. We did some research recently where we were asking about how many sources do you search on? What's the starting point? Where do you start your searches? And the typical job seeker, or 48% of the job seekers, told us that they use 8 individual places to search for jobs. That's quite a lot. After that, though, we ask the next question, which is, once you've found a company that you're interested in, how many sources do you use then to research that? And the answer was 10. So 8 to start in terms of the research and searching, and 10 just to sort of research what the values of that company is. One of the things that we like to do in terms of looking at how a journey works is to use diary studies. And a diary study is just as it sounds. We basically ask a series of job seekers to keep a diary for a couple of weeks and write down everything that they do in relation to the job seeking journey. So when do you search for jobs? What devices do you use? What time of day it is? And what type of task are you doing? Are you doing looking, researching? Are you applying for the job? And you can see here, these are the 3 standard sort of tasks that are involved, and they're pretty much as you would expect. On the far side there, we've got discovery, so that's searching, finding out about possible jobs, different ways of doing that. The middle phase is researching, so that's okay, now I've found a job, I'm slightly interested in it, expanding my knowledge about that particular job, and then finally moving into application. And we've got ranges of times here because different people who are on different career paths spend different amounts of times, but it gives you a rough idea about how long they're spending on doing each of these tasks. In the mornings, because we did diary studies, we get a really clear picture about when they're doing stuff. So in the mornings, we get really high percentage of people doing searching. This is specifically between 7 and 9 o'clock. It's the commute time. Our servers spike horrendously as everybody opens up their phones on the way to work, reads their onsemails and picks up their job alerts and then clicks on them to have a look at the jobs that are available. We can both see it in the research for the diaries, but also on the servers that serve up all of our jobs. And typically they'll be doing this for between 10 and 30 minutes in the morning. In the evenings, people move over to research. So they tend to do more research in the evening, so we've got down here at 36%. This next stat that I'm going to bring up is my favourite. When we did the diary studies, we found out that 12% of people apply for jobs while in bed. I'm not sure that's an actionable piece of information, but it's definitely my favourite piece of information. I'm not quite sure how I expected that to be like that. During the working day, we can look not just at the diary study work that we've done, but actually the loads across our many servers to see what's going on. And we find that there's specific spikes. So I think as Neil said earlier on, we can see in the morning when people are commuting that they're searching. They also search during the break times, and we can definitely see that, so tea breaks and dinner breaks. What we tend to see is right at the beginning of the day, a huge spike in mobile use. And then over the morning, desktop use coming in and peaking at about 12 o'clock in the UK as people start to apply on their jobs. And they switch between devices to do different tasks. So if there's anything from this part of the presentation I'd like you to take away is that not only are people using lots of different places to go and do searching and researching, they have specific tasks that they do and they break them down: discovery, research, apply. They do them at different times during the day. They tend to be doing very early on in the day the searching element with their phones. And then they switch devices during the day often. And we can tell that as well because at the moment, across all of our network, 58% of the traffic is mobile, and that's risen quite sharply over the last 4 years. But still only 39% is actually applications. There's a 19% difference between people using mobile devices to look at job boards and look at job advertising to what there's actually on applications. People tend to switch back to desktops to do their applications. That gap has narrowed considerably. 4 years ago, that was 85% and 15%, so down up to 39% now. So if I switch perspectives and looking at it from your perspective, one of the common models when I'm talking to recruiters is this model here. As we've got more and more involved in marketing, we tend to look at the company career site as a place where you put up your proposition, your people's proposition, you know, the employer value proposition and your people promises go into your company career site. So that's where you sell yourselves, the roles and the company. And the other side of the line is basically the marketing that you do, how you attract people, how do you get people, the traffic to come over to your site where you can sell yourself properly. And this is a model that's becoming really quite prevalent at the moment. If you take this approach and you think about it this way, it's likely that you'll be reporting with charts that look like this. This was from the Nationwide. I could have picked anybody. I believe this actually was presented a couple of years ago at this event. The chart basically looks at the different channels and says, how many applications am I getting from each of the channels? Now, this will be really different for different people here. Some of you will be using sourcing a lot, so you won't be using job advertising, and the job advertising bits will be really small. But some way or another, you will be doing this. And the reason that I bring this up is not really to pinpoint Nationwide at all. Is to talk about a really serious problem we have with attribution. So a few minutes ago, I talked about how the journey breaks down, that someone starts often on a mobile device and then changes device during the day as they change task. Modern ATS systems or any electronic system that's online that tries to attribute where your sources came from often use URL tracking, those little codes that sit at the end of the URL to keep track of where someone came from, or they're using information that's actually in the request. If someone swaps from one device to another, when we do our research, we ask them how they do it, and the most common way they do it is to copy the URL into an email and email themselves, or even more than that, just copy the name of the company and the job that they were looking at which point your tracking is broken. So attribution related to the value that your job advertising plays in the total of your mix of all of the marketing that you do is probably out by about 10 to 30%. You're going to see that you'll be seeing things like, you know, this channel here, this particular job board gave you these many applications. You should add quite a lot more to it because we can't track properly. And this is not an issue that's just for the job board industry or for us as recruitment. This is really common also in marketing in general. So in this case, our data, which is really quite substantial, doesn't help us as much as we would want to. So every year we run surveys with job seekers, both here in the UK, America and Europe, and we actually directly ask them, where do you start your journey from? And when you ask that question, the job boards come up at 61%. And you can see here the company's career site has dropped down to 4%. So you can actually see when asked, it's very different to what you get from sort of the reporting mechanism. This next slide, I think, is probably, and the stats on it are probably the most important ones that I'm going to share with you today. It breaks down into two parts. The first bit is actually about when you ask people about job adverts and how it actually affects their job seeking journey. So what value do they give to people while they're looking for jobs? You can see that the topmost one is to locate jobs, but then to apply on career sites. So the job seekers are actually dislocating the discovery mechanism to the point where they're applying. So they are, in their own minds, they understand that they do one thing on one place and they do the other on the other. And that sort of goes back to this point that they're switching from one to another. And then secondly to that, then locate jobs and apply directly to job boards, which you would expect would be the main thing that they would do. Down the bottom though, and I think the talk at the beginning of the day sort of pinpointed this as well, they're using job boards to research for the types of jobs that are available. So this is basically the careers path type stuff. So if I'm doing this job, what's a job that's above me? What would be the next sort of level of promotion? But more interestingly as well, would there be any jobs that to the side of the job that I'm doing that are interesting to me that I could move into? So they're trying to find out about different career paths that are going on. And then the really important one down the bottom, 36% of people said when asked that they're actually looking at job boards to do research employers, industries and professions. So they're basically doing branding research. They're looking at you and going, what's your proposition? What are you about? How do I understand this industry? And how do I understand the companies that are prominent in this industry and what they're offering? So they're not looking at the specific roles, they're actually using it to gauge those things. So let's take a look at the roots of advertising, job advertising. And anybody of my age is familiar with this. This is sort of like an old school local newspaper with the classified ads on. I remember doing this when I left university to find sort of summer jobs, penciling around job adverts. This is where most of this industry that I'm involved in came from. It was born out of this, the classified ads area. I was quite interested to know how long this goes back. So while I was preparing the slides, I did a bit of research. And I went back through a lot of academic papers about the newspaper industry and actually tried to find the earliest possible job ad in the UK. And this is it, 1681. Newspapers had only been around for 10 years, but someone was paying for advertising for a specific role to go into a newspaper. So if you're in this room and you're involved in placing job adverts, you're part of the 300-year-old profession. If we move right forward now, this is Google for Jobs. This is probably the latest contender in the sort of area of job advertising. It's the newest entrant and the one that's causing the most waves. What I'd like to say, though, is not a lot has changed. There's two parts to this interface, if you think about it. In the center here, we've got all of the text for the advert, and that's not much different to what we just saw a few seconds ago in the newspaper. The main bit that's actually changed when we've gone online is the quality of the search and the way that you can find jobs for people. But the actual advert itself is pretty much the same as it was 20 years ago when newspaper classified advertising was at its height, and actually not even that much far away from 300 years ago when we first saw newspaper job adverts in the UK. So this is probably preaching to the converted. I think we're all really aware of this. This is a sort of range of pretty standard stats that are common to our industry at the moment. 2 in 3 UK businesses are finding it hard to find candidates. 71% say that it's getting more difficult. I think I don't need to keep repeating this. This is something that you all know. This is a quote that I tend to use when I'm talking about these types of stats. It really sums it up for me. The balance of power has changed quite considerably. It's different for each of you, but you know, this one was about STEM about 2 years ago. I think it was written, this quote, but it really sort of sums up where we're at. We really have to reach out to candidates. It's their game now. We need to sort of get them on board to come and work for us. We're doing the selling rather than them coming to us. So then, if that is the case, going back a couple of slides to me showing you all of that text, why are we still doing adverts that are dense blocks of text, which are really quite hard for people to comprehend and read at speed? I mean, this is the era when people skim read things. The attention span on a web page now is down into single-digit seconds. Yet, we provide really large blocks of text, which are quite hard to read, in an environment where we want to attract people, and we're finding it difficult to attract people. This completely seems at odds. So all of this research that I've been sharing with you has been sort of ongoing for 2 or 3 years. We've known about these things for quite a long time now. And a couple of years ago, we started thinking about this as a problem space and thought, would there be a way to change this round a little bit? Because first impressions really do count. And so many of you are now investing quite heavily in your employer brands and the propositions that go with them. Why can't we try and mix the job advertising of old with the employer and branding work that's been done and the proposition work that's been done now and bring the two together? And do that in such a way that it works in unison with the types of journeys that we see in the ones that I've just described to you, these multi-device journeys. So we came up with this ad format called nthuse. And basically, it allows you to design an ad any way you want. You can have pictures in it, you can have text in it, you can have the job description to the top, so you can talk about the role first, or you can talk about the company first if you want to. Basically, it takes the power away from the job boards or the people that are distributing the jobs, hands it back to you guys so that you can tell a story. When we talk about nthuse, we often talk about the fact that we can add things like video and stuff like that. But really, at its heart, nthuse is about giving people the power to tell a story, giving them the tools that allow them to construct a story about what it's like to do a specific role in a specific company. And this was one of the first ads that we created for Macmillan. We actually tested it on The Guardian. We ran a campaign where we took all of Macmillan's jobs for a 2-week period, which was about 71 jobs that were posted on The Guardian. During that 2-week period, 9,300 job seekers looked at these different ads. And we tracked the difference between a standard ad and an nthuse branded ad. So this is the A/B testing type stuff that I was talking about earlier. And we saw a 50% uplift in conversion rates between the two. This is another one that we did just recently, and I've sort of brought two up just to show you, to mainly show you the difference in the design here. This was for my dentists on BDJ jobs, and we saw a 40% increase in this one. Probably a slightly lesser known brand, so they haven't got the uplift that the brand that Macmillan have, but still a really substantial uplift. When we do general A/B testing for job boards, anything that's over 1 to 2% we consider to be a really successful change, and we'll implement it across all of our job boards. A 40 to 50% increase in conversion rate is pretty much unheard of. And this was a really nice comment for a system that we did for Mumsnet. It was an ad, I believe, for the BBC, where they were trying to get parents back into TV engineering again. So people who'd left the profession and they wanted to bring them back in again. And it had quite a good impact for them. So what does this all mean? I just wanted to leave you with 2 or 3 takeaway points. The first is that job adverts are playing a very different role today. So, as I said, hopefully you remember those 4 points that I had, and the fact that a job advert's not just about the applications you get. It has a lot more benefit than that. It has a benefit to your employer brand, and it's also about setting you up in the greater space so that people are aware of you as a company. The second one is that people have the attention span of fishes these days, back to it's only a few seconds to a page. If you're going to attract them and get them in there, dense text is really hard for that. So adverts that have got white space in them, large subtitles, and other types of content like imagery that can portray a feeling or a value quicker are going to have much more impact. And finally, as all of us are now with the internet, because of the speed which we view it and the way that we view it, we're quite impatient with things. So the quicker you can get your brand and value up in front of people, the faster you can convert them down the line from that researching piece at the beginning where the discovery piece at the beginning where they're just searching for jobs, through to the part where they're actually actively researching. So it's about switching from one mode to another. And we believe if we can push forward your brand out into the marketing channels where you're actually trying to attract traffic and put the employer brand there, we'll be able to impact the conversion. So that's it. Thank you very much. There's a few social network connections there. If you're actually interested in helping out with our research, we also have a link for research. And thank you very much.